Thank you for joining us today in Jennifer Schaus and Associates complimentary webinar series. We are coming to you live from Washington, D.C. This year on Fridays, we are covering procurement playbooks. We will take a deep dive into doing business with the federal agencies and departments with our panelists. On Wednesdays at 12 p.m. Eastern, we will cover the FAR supplements or procurement regulations for the agencies and departments. And on Fridays, we will cover the business development and marketing aspects of the same agencies and departments. The full schedule and sign-up links and the recordings are on our website. We'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsors. The Virginia PTAC at GMU offers free one-on-one counseling to firms in Virginia on federal, state, and local procurement topics. Online resources and group trainings are free with no restriction on business location. If you are interested in learning more, please use the links provided to explore what PTACs can offer. And a special thanks to our sponsor, the Federal Business Council. The FBC creates and manages virtual and in-person meetings and events to connect appropriate industry and government thought leaders, product providers, and solutions with government programs that use them. The FBC works within mission-specific programs for a variety of agencies to connect government and industry in the form of in-person and virtual conferences, training events, policy dialogue, and outreach. Over the last 40 plus years, FBC has become a comprehensive resource for connecting industry and federal government. Daston is an IT and cloud solutions provider working with corporations, the military, and government agencies to lower their costs, increase scalability, improve operational efficiency, and meet compliance regulations using targeted cloud-based solutions. Daston is a certified partner of Oracle NetSuite, a premier tier Google Cloud partner, and a certified partner of Cisco, Virtue, AODocs, and Authenticate. For more information about Daston's services or to schedule a complimentary consultation, email joe.alston or visit the Daston website. Looking to connect with the government and military decision makers? GovWhitePapers.com is a free resource for the public sector and supporting industries to find, post, and promote government and military-related content. Stay informed on topics like Navy, Marine Corps, cybersecurity, COVID-19, AI, education, and more. Plus, upload your organization's content for free to boost your website traffic and exposure in the government community. Our B2G advertising options connect you with the targeted government and military audience, including premium content subscriptions that provide gated content promotions plus lead delivery directly to your inbox. Claim your free membership on govwhitepapers.com today to get started. Please join us at the Kennedy Center for a night of networking with over 200 federal contractors. Our quarterly event will take place on Monday, June 20th. Sponsorship opportunities are available. Federal agencies will be present and will be listed as they confirm. Please note that ticket prices increase on June 13th. We hope to see you there. Today, we are covering the U.S. Department of Energy. Our panelists for today are Artisha Meehan from GovSpend. Great to have you with us, Artisha.
Nice to be here. Thank you.
Next, we want to thank Priyanka Sharma from the Small Business Administration for also joining us today. Great to have you with us, Priyanka.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now we will look at the business opportunities and contracting trends within Fedmine. Artisha, I'll mute myself now and just let me know when you're ready for the next slide. The floor is yours.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And maybe we start with the next slide. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Artisha Meehan, and I'm the Senior Product Manager for Fedmine at GovSpend. So first and foremost, thank you. I'm always excited to be here and present. Thank you, Jennifer Schaus, for hosting these weekly Playbook series. I'm sure it's very helpful for a lot of, for all companies. So a little bit about Fedmine. Fedmine's mission is to bring accurate information and unmatched transparency and accountability to the world of federal government contracting. The company was founded in 2004 by a founder who was a federal government contractor So truly, it was founded on his vision of the type of data he believed was important for a company to be successful. Fedmine is now part of GovSpend, which is the largest provider of purchase orders and information on the state, local, and education markets. Next slide. So what we really do is we integrate all these various federal data sets into one easy-to-use platform. This is just a visual representation of the data sets that we include. And next slide. And what we really do is we work with the federal government that actually uses the platform for goaling and market research. We also work with federal prime contractors, subcontractors, and then interestingly, we have what we call our affinity circle, which is really a lot of service providers that use Fedmine for just getting that visibility and run data analytics. So the next slide. So today we're focused on the Department of Energy, and it was very interesting for me to sort of get into understanding the Department of Energy and everything that it does. And I just find that it's very important as we're looking at an agency to understand the mission. What is the agency doing? How was it formed? Because I believe that truly impacts the acquisitions that are happening within an agency, and what is it going to purchase in the future. And I think we need to get into this level of detail to really understand if what we are selling or the service that we are providing is the right fit for that agency and the agency's mission and what its future vision is. So having said that, the mission of the Department of Energy is really to support the nation's prosperity by addressing its climate, energy, environmental, and nuclear security challenges through transformative science and technology solutions. It was very interesting for me to sort of get a little bit into the history of the Department of Energy. It's been like it came into formal existence, I guess, since 1977. However, the agency traces its lineage to the Manhattan Project effort to develop the atomic bomb during World War II and the various energy-related programs that had been previously dispersed throughout all the various federal agencies. So that's really how, that's how the Department of Energy's history really goes back to. In terms of its functions, and I've just sort of given you a brief overview, but I found it very interesting when I started looking to say, okay, so it protects human health and the environment through effective and efficient long-term surveillance and maintenance. It preserves and protects and makes accessible legacy records and information. It supports an effective and efficient workforce that is structured to accomplish the department's missions. It implements departmental policies concerning continuity of worker pension and benefits. It manages your legacy land and assets, emphasizing the safety, reuse, and disposition. It also mitigates community impacts resulting from the cleanup of the legacy waste and changing departmental missions. And it actively acts as a liaison and coordinates all policy issues with appropriate departmental organizations. So I sort of talk about these functions because as we get into the budget, you will see how all of this sort of ultimately goes to make sure that the agency is fulfilling its mission and its functions for which it believes it needs to do. Next slide. So let's look at what has the agency done. In fiscal year 21, it awarded a little less than $39 billion to 1,669 companies. You could see the top contracting offices and year-over-year spend. As you are looking, as you're focusing on where within the agency do you want to focus or what is being purchased across the federal various contracting offices. It also gets to be very important to see year-over-year spend within that specific contracting office. So this is just to give you a quick overview. Next slide. So in terms of the place of performance, I believe this also ties in with where the main works are, where the main major laboratories are. So again, do focus in, and as you're trying to see where the contracts are being awarded, the place of performance does get to be very important. In terms of who your top prime contractors are, here's a listing of the top primes: Triad National Security, the Livermore National Security Laboratory, Consolidated Nuclear Security, UT Battelle. All of these are your major prime contractors. And as you sort of go more into, and if you go into that report that was linked in the earlier slide, you'll actually see that the bulk of the agency's contracts are awarded as other than small business. And when you sort of tie in with why the agency was formed, its requirements, and the type of work that it does, it sort of makes sense why a large portion of these contracts do get awarded as other than small business. So next slide. In terms of, looking at your major NAICS codes that are being used, and as you've heard me say before, always also look at the PSC codes, because in many cases and instances, it's those PSC codes that really give you a much better idea of what an agency is purchasing. But if I'm just looking at the NAICS codes, the facility support services, R&D, remediation, hazardous waste treatment and disposal are all the top NAICS codes that are being used or under which contracts are being acquired. Next slide. So let's look at our small business contracts. We have a little less than $2 billion that are awarded to a little more than 1,000 companies. Navarro Research, RSI, NTEC, Portage, KeyLogic, Northwind Solutions are all your top companies that are winning contracts as small businesses in those specific NAICS codes. And I always like to clarify that truly it is that contracting officer's determination whether that contract is being awarded as a small business or as an other than small business. So next slide. When we further look into the small business contracts and you start looking into the NAICS codes, you'll see it's a much better mix of NAICS codes. And that sort of, again, ties into the type of work our small businesses do. So it's remediation services, absolutely, engineering services, facility support, environmental consulting services, construction. These are all your top NAICS codes for FY21. Look also, if you are a small business, look at how that agency is procuring in terms of how is it using its set-asides. Look at the contracts that are being awarded as 8A competed or sole sources. If you're a woman-owned business, how many contracts is the agency actually awarding as woman-owned small business, or are they giving those as small business set-asides? Those are things that you really want to look into and get familiar with as you're understanding that agency. Of course, use keywords as you analyze an agency even further. Keywords get to be really, really important because it is always interesting to see all the various NAICS codes that a specific keyword might fall under, and that sort of further helps you fine-tune your result sets. So I'm always going to tell you, and then as you're doing keywords and NAICS codes, understanding and seeing what's being awarded, further delve into those, especially if you are coming from, especially if you are an 8A or a woman-owned small business or a HUBZone or a veteran-owned, right? You want to see how is that agency procuring? Are they doing set-asides within the type of work that you do for your socioeconomic category, and then overlay that with how is that agency doing with its goals too. So next slide. And this is where I think it gets to be even more interesting when we start looking at, with the pandemic, how has that affected the agency's contracting? This slide, I have to change the first line, but and when the slides get sent to you, you'll have the corrected ones, but everything else is okay. In FY20, we have more than $1 billion that were awarded to 112 companies. And in FY21, I have about a little less than 290 million that were awarded to 59 companies. NAICS in these cases that are being used include similar, as we've seen in the past, those of remediation, R&D, facility support, and hazardous waste treatment. And feel free to click into those report links to see, get a better understanding of what that is. Next slide. Also look at the SBIR and STTR programs, right? Agencies will award those either as small business contracts or as grants. Have information on both for you here. Definitely, Department of Energy is using grants to award a lot of R&D type of projects. And I found one that was pretty interesting in that they've got this whole category for advanced research projects for energy. And, under that, more than $1 billion were awarded last year. So, keep in mind as you are doing certain agencies, and Department of Energy is definitely one of them, understand not only what the contracts are, but definitely have a look at the grants that the agency is awarding. So next slide. Again, as you all know, I'm always going to focus in and tell you we're looking at NAICS and PSC codes, which is great, but keep in mind that throughout the federal government, there is an initiative at looking at category management, looking at your top categories, looking at how does that sort of tie in with strategic sourcing. So when you look at you look at the top categories, facilities and constructions is definitely the major one at energy. Remediation and all of those services fall under that top category. So you obviously could get down into the subcategory and the next level down. Look at things such as research and development. Look at how much is going to small versus other than small businesses. Again, gets to be very important. In this case, you could see, while professional services account for less than 5% of the contracts at Department of Energy, they are trying to do a lot more in terms for small businesses in those categories. So I think that is very important and for us to keep in mind as we're looking at agencies. So next slide. And that sort of brings us into, how is an agency purchasing? Of course, you want to analyze, what are the contracts that are being awarded on GSA schedules or major GVACs or MACs and, major vehicles. In this case, I am just going to look at the top major GVACs that an agency is using. NASA SOUP and NASA SOUP 5, along with WETS2 and OASIS and CIO SP3 are your top 5 GVACs. Now, this is looking at overall Department of Energy. You always could fine tune your results based on NAICS codes, based on keywords, based on a combination, just to help you further understand, do you need to tie up with any of the companies that are on these vehicles that are winning contracts, or do you need to figure out how to get on these vehicles? Those are things that we want to focus and understand more as we are getting ready or we're trying to deepen our relationship within a federal agency. So next slide. The next thing I wanted to focus in, especially when you're looking at an agency and you're understanding that, the work of the agency sort of makes it, gives most of the contracts to the larger companies, you want to look at what is happening in terms of the subcontract data. Now, we do get our subcontract data from USA spending, which gets the information from FSRS. But in FY21, we had less than $10 billion that were awarded, that were reported as subcontract awards to a little more than 2,000 companies. Looking at your NAICS codes, facility support, remediations, services, a pretty nice mix of companies that are actually getting these subcontracts. So it's always interesting to see that. Of course, though the bulk of it, given that the bulk of the contracts at DOE are, under facility support services, I think this sort of ties in with that. But let's go in a little deeper. So next slide. So when we start going in a little deeper, look at who your top 10 primes are, Triad, Fluor, Consolidated Nuclear, AECOM. These are the top companies that are reporting those subcontracts in FSRS and hence in USA spending. But this is where you, again, can use things like subcontracts, keywords. You could use NAICS codes, you could use socioeconomic categories and further fine-tune the results and see how is a specific prime awarding the subcontracts. Who are they awarding it to? What is it being awarded for? At what price is it being awarded? So get into those details because, this is a nice way to create those relationships, which can be very long-term in many cases with the primes. So, have a look at your top sub-awardees, understand what are they doing, who are they, what is it that they are providing, what makes them unique, how long has that relationship been there. It all all the data, all of this intelligence sort of goes in and helps you it makes you understand the agency, helps you create your strategy. So next slide. And that sort of brings us into opportunities, right? Obviously, you might say, I really need to focus in on understanding the subcontract side within an agency because that is how I'm going to enter this agency. I'm going to grow within the agency. And then at that point, understanding that subcontracting world gets to be very, very important. It's also important that when you start understanding existing contracts at an agency to see, if that specific contract or task order has a subcontract requirement and run searches based off that. But when we are looking at overall opportunities, the new opportunities are always going to be based on, of course, existing contracts that are going to be renewing, that are expiring. That is where we're looking at existing historical data and seeing is that contract going to be recompeted on, or is it going to go to that existing holder? How is that going to be done? That's where we want to sort of understand the expiring contracts and understand which ones could be recompeted. But then, there are constantly new opportunities that are being new initiatives at an agency that you want to know about, and that is where you want to plan for the future. And that is why understanding the mission and the vision and the priorities of an agency gets to be important. And then actually spending time in understanding the budget and all the various programs that might be there. Looking at your pre-solicitations and sources sought notices in SAM.gov, because that's the agency's way of looking and doing their market research. Create expiring searches. If you are on specific vehicles or GSA schedules, use, fine-tune those results sets so that you have a more focused list of, that you're looking at, and it's not like this whole wild world that can be overwhelming, I think. So next slide. So this, so when we start talking about programs, this is where we say, have a look at existing IT major programs that are already in place. This is a quick look at your Exhibit 53. And it sort of is going to show you, what is budgeted, what has been spent in the past, but what is also budgeted for the fiscal year 2022. So this is just a quick look at your top programs within the Exhibit 53. Let's go to the next slide. And this one allows you, the Exhibit 300s allows you actually to go in a little deeper. I love the Exhibit 53s because they do give you a lot of good information, including, in certain cases, who are the existing incumbents on those programs, what's been budgeted, and in many cases, you'll also find, who is the program manager, and, is that the rating, right, of how's that program doing? Is it is it doing well? Is it red? What's the health of the program? So I think that's also gets to be very important, especially if you are in that IT field. So just to confirm or clarify, the Exhibit 53s and 300s are specifically related to IT. Next slide. And then let's start looking at your expiring contracts. So these are the top 10 contracts that are expiring in the next 12 months. And I ran these reports like just this week of the 17th or 18th of April. So the data is as current as can be as of that day. And when I ran the report, I have more than $69 billion of contracts that are expiring over the next 12 months that, I'm sure quite a few of them might be rebid, might be recompeted, or might go as sole sources and things like that. But here's a list of the top 10. Next slide. In terms of looking at your top NAICS codes, a little different here with R&D right on top, followed by facility support, and also construction. And this is where you might say, these are construction contracts that are not going to be recompeted because it might have been new construction, but they might have a service component to it. So those are things that you want to look at. In terms of place of performance, gives you an idea of what has happened where, and again, helps you see and get more visibility. So go to the next slide. And then you want to look at, this is just to show you that in the next 12 months, I have a little less than $2.5 billion in contracts that are awarded as small businesses that are expiring. And this is just to give you a quick look at, there are contracts that are 8A sole sources. And if you are an 8A company, it might help for you to know when are those 8A contracts, if it's in the services field, when is the company's 8A expiring, or are they on a 8A stars 3? What is their strategy? Is there a way for you to maybe create those relationships with those 8As? So understanding those 8A sole sources gets to be very important, as also looking at the 8A competed piece. So I always like to point that out, especially if you're an 8A. Pay attention to the 8A expiration dates, because that will help guide your future strategy. Next slide. And then here's a listing of your top 10 companies. As you're looking at those, as you're looking at 8A sole sources, also pay attention on, are they an Alaskan Native or, one of the tribal companies' 8A programs, because again, that will go into figuring out your strategy going forward. So next slide. And then further, when you look at the expiring contracts, not only are we looking at place of performance, but you also now are looking at all the various NAICS codes that these contracts are coming out, that are expiring in. And this is where we would tell you, use keywords, use NAICS codes, use place of performance, use a socioeconomic status category, and fine tune these results, filter them as narrow as you might want, or as broad as you want, or start broad and narrow down, and sort of just get to a point which is manageable and helpful and more focused on what you do. Next slide. And then this is a quick look at just some of the pre-solicitations and source of sort and contracts that are open at that on the and just to give you a quick look at what is there. Again, you see pre-solicitations, it falls into the type of work you do. Please go ahead and respond to them. So next slide. So a little bit about the budget highlights, and there's a lot. I have a link in my slides to the FY23 proposed budget. It is very interesting. It is very detailed, but overall, the FY23 budget is proposing a 15% increase over the FY21 enacted level. Overall, these are your broad categories of where the budget, what the budget request is. They have a new infrastructure, new designation, new repurposing and infrastructure arena. So, but that is truly focused on, clean energy and on clean energy infrastructure. So top levels, but let's get a little bit into the details. These are just the ones that I found interesting. Next slide. Under the infrastructure, there's a lot of cool things, nice things, important things that are being budgeted for. A lot of new programs. For example, you have $727 million for the newly established Office of State and Community and Energy Programs, which is new. But you also have things that are important, especially in today's world, where we have more than $200 million that are being budgeted for the Office of Cybersecurity, Energy Security, and Emergency Response for securing our energy infrastructure, which is so important. So you also have, things like the Title 17 loan program, which is again important. There are things like a tribal energy loan guarantee program, again, to help with the economic opportunities in the tribal community. So I think going through the budget and seeing what the main programs are gets to be, again, important. And what you'll notice is that they're always sort of tying in to the main functions or goals or initiatives of an agency. There also a couple of other interesting things were $150 million for the Office of Energy Policy and Programs for financial and technical assistance within the Indian Land and Home. So there's a lot of nice programs. So I would recommend that, definitely take a look at the main budget document. So that was looking at that infrastructure. Let's get into the next slide, which is, I think, focused on progressing scientific research. And this is looking at the major priorities that are based on climate change and clean energy. Again, a lot of interesting R&D, scientific research type of programs. I'm not going to read them out because these slides are going to be sent to you, but I would tell you that as you say, I want to look at that high energy physics program, do go into the budget document and look at more details. So next slide. And then, the next slide was on innovation, which again has some very interesting programs, and whether it's looking at that $1.7 billion for the Office of Nuclear Energy to support the diverse civilian nuclear energy programs and efforts for research and development for nuclear energy technologies, or the program for R&D in the fossil energy and carbon management arena. So again, a lot of good budgeted, there is money budgeted, but we have to get more into the details of understanding what each program might be underneath all of these broad headings. Next slide. And then, of course, the environmental management, which really supports the Department of Energy's needs and challenges of the nation's Manhattan Project and Cold War legacy responsibilities. This is a quick look at what has been budgeted for each of these sites. So I thought it would be helpful, so I sort of tried to put it in these slides. Yep. And next slide. And then a couple of other things. You do have administration and oversight, so have a look at, what has been budgeted for the Energy Information Administration, as also just general oversight activities. What was also interesting for me was that, there's more than $62 billion that's been budgeted and provided for the department over a 5-year period, again, to provide more a clean energy future. So please do spend time in looking into what of those programs are, if that is what you do. And then, of course, the link to the budget is provided. I would highly recommend that, if this agency is where you are focused on, to have a look at some of those initiatives and budget requirements that have been asked for. I think with that, that's the end of my slides. Again, if any questions, please feel free to reach out. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Artisha, for a great overview. Unfortunately, we are unable to host a Department of Energy speaker for today's webinar, but you can find the main link to the agency and department, as well as the link to the Small Business Administration on the slides that will be sent out. You can also see the link to the acquisition forecast here, the link to the SBA scorecard for the Department of Energy, and the link to events for the Department of Energy. Once again, these slides will be sent out after the webinar. All right. So now we're going to move into an inside perspective from the Small Business Administration. Once again, I want to welcome Priyanka Sharma. I'll mute myself now and just let me know when you're ready for the next slide. Great to have you, Priyanka. The floor is yours.
Thanks so much for having me, everyone. I want to add one disclaimer. We are not, our participation does not mean an endorsement or support for any of the products or professional services offered here today, but we're very thankful for the opportunity to present. So next slide. So I'm here to talk a little bit about our office. We are the Office of Advocacy, and you can go to the next slide. So we're actually an independent voice for small business in the federal government. Even though we have SBA in front of our name, we were actually created by Congress in the 70s to be the regulatory watchdog for small business. And so we look for compliance with a statute called the Regulatory Flexibility Act, which requires agencies to consider small entities when they're writing regulations. And we're also the source of small business statistics. Next slide. So we have three main missions. Our regulatory mission, as I mentioned, oversees compliance with the Reg Flex Act, or RFA, which is a law that requires federal agencies to consider flexible approaches to achieving regulatory goals. We also have a research mission. We're researching small business issues in the small business economy, and we sponsor and produce small business data and statistics. And finally, we have a legislative mission which monitors proposed congressional legislation for impact on small business. Next slide. So these are just a few small business statistics. I don't think I need to belabor the point to you all, but really our nation depends on small business, and that's one of the reasons that Congress created our office. Next slide. So as you all know, it's not easy being small. Small businesses face many costs and challenges, and often what goes on in DC has a big effect on smalls. So new regulations can unduly burden small businesses by adding complexity, paperwork requirements, labeling, product redesign, costly outside expertise, licensing, training, permits, and the list goes on and on. And often small businesses lack the resources, time, personnel expertise, and money to get involved in the rulemaking process. Next slide. So that's where our office comes into play. We serve as a voice for you all before the White House, Congress, and federal agencies. And so if a small business has an issue with a proposed rule, or that proposed rule is likely to have a significant impact on a substantial number of small businesses, we represent the concerns to the federal government agencies and propose alternative solutions that will provide a solution to the problem, without harming small business. Next slide. So these are just some examples of our role in federal rulemaking. As I mentioned, we work with federal agencies to ensure that they comply with the RFA when they write regulations. And I am one of 12 attorneys in our office who work directly on the regulations. My portfolio includes energy, agriculture, and natural resources. So I work with DOE, USDA, and DOI on their rules. But we also have attorneys who work with every other federal agency. So we also do interagency communications during the drafting of regulations. So sometimes an agency will reach out to us directly and we'll be able to comment on the rules during that time. Other times we'll write public comment letters to the agencies on the record. We also offer training on how to comply with the Reg Flex Act, and we offer alerts to our stakeholders on regulatory issues that may affect your small business. So if you go on our website, you can sign up by issue area or agency to get those regulatory alerts. And then finally, we do outreach to small businesses, including roundtables and site visits. Next slide. So this is just an example of some of the research products we produce. Some of the more popular ones are include state profiles. If you go to the next slide, you'll see some of the data that we have, and that this is our overall state profile. And then on the next slide, you'll see our state profiles. We also have them by congressional district. We do research on business turnover, employment, financing, minority, women, and veteran-owned businesses. And we often receive data requests from congressional offices and other agencies. But we're also always looking for ideas for future small business research. And actually, our RFP is going out soon if it's not already out for that. So if you go to our website and you're interested in that, you're welcome to look for that there. Next slide. We also conduct nationwide outreach. So we have 10 regional advocates. Right now, we only have one. Those positions are still vacant because those are the only political positions in our office aside from our chief counsel. And those regional advocates meet with small businesses around the nation and discover real world effects of federal policies and regulations. Next slide. Finally, we do get involved in international trade. By law, whenever a trade agreement is being negotiated, we have to convene an interagency working group and report to Congress on the small business economic impact of the agreement under negotiation. So in 2018, we published our first report for the US-Canada-Mexico agreement, and we're currently conducting outreach with Japan, the United Kingdom, and the EU. So if you know a small business or if you are a small business affected by international trade, we would definitely like to reach out to you and have you serve on some of those panels. Next slide. So this outlines some of the differences between SBA and advocacy. As I mentioned, we're in an independent office within the federal government housed within SBA. So our office advocates for small businesses by voicing their concerns with proposed regulations. We offer economic research. SBA, on the other hand, is one of the federal government agencies under the executive, and they support small businesses through loan programs, disaster assistance, counseling, and with the goal of preserving free competitive enterprise and strengthening the US economy. So while we offer regulatory assistance, SBA's ombudsman helps with complaints about existing rules, and they assist small businesses who feel harmed by federal practices. So we help on the front end when the rule is being created, whereas the ombudsman helps with the enforcement of those rules. And as you can see from this chart, there's some other similarities and differences between the two, but that's not to say that we operate in a vacuum. We often reach out to our SBA counterparts and can put people in touch with them if there are things that they want to reach out to them about. Next slide. So this just outlines a few key differences between the Ombudsman's Office and SBA. As I mentioned, we do have an existing working relationship with the Ombudsman's Office, so we are able to help small businesses get in touch with them if they have unfair enforcement that they would like to report. And you can go on their website to fill out a form for that directly. Next slide. So this is sort of a very busy slide, and I'll try to break it down as quickly as I can. Basically, this outlines the federal rulemaking process. So when an agency is directed to propose a rule, OMB within the White House will review that proposed rule to see if it's significant. Significance determinations just mean that the rule is going to have an effect of $100 million or more, or it will have an adverse effect on the economy or affect it in a significant way. If the rule is significant, then Advocacy will have an opportunity to review that rule before it's published to the public. And at that point, it's deliberative, but we'll still have an opportunity to provide comments. And that's an opportunity for you to get involved in that process also. So as you can see, you'll go through all of these steps to decide whether or not the RFA applies. It'll be published, there'll be a public comment period, and then they'll go through the same process with the final rule. Next slide. So how do small businesses fit into this process? So as I mentioned, if OMB determines a rule is significant, then they will review the rule before it goes to the Federal Register and becomes public. At that stage, you are able to request a meeting with OMB to provide information on the rule and how it can affect you. You can do that by going to the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs' website, and they have an online meeting request. So you can actually have a meeting directly with OMB about the rule. You won't be able to see the rule or read the contents of it at that stage, but you will be able to provide some comments that can help inform the OMB as well as the interagency partners review. So the next place where small businesses can fit into this process is during the public comment period. And again, Advocacy will publish a regulatory alert. And so you'll get a copy of that alert with a link to the rule as well as the comment deadline, and you'll be able to go in and write your comments there. So you can submit comments to the federal agencies during that public comment period. And I'll go over a few key things to highlight in those public comments. But then again, at the final rule stage, that's another opportunity to request a meeting with OMB at the final rule stage and be able to provide comments to OMB then. Next slide. So how to write an effective comment letter. So agencies are really concerned with how much the rule will cost your small business. This includes both monetary costs, but also time costs, time to read and implement the rule, any fees or equipment or hiring attorneys or consultants. It's not just the cost and revenue comparison, but also anything else that may impact your business. So then finally, you're going to want to tell the agency what it should do by describing options or alternatives. For example, if there's a different timeline that would make the rule easier for your small business to comply with, if there are things that they should clarify, if there are exemptions they can give small businesses, this would be the place to do that. Next slide. So once a rule goes final, you'll have the opportunity to challenge it in court. And one of the legal challenges you can make is that the agency did not consider the impacts to small business and that would be under the Reg Flex Act. And also Congress has the opportunity to review final rules. And if they disapprove, they can actually go in and get rid of them through the Congressional Review Act. Next slide. So this is just a nuanced slide about the Regulatory Flexibility Act. It was passed in the 80s. And again, agencies are forced to consider the impact to small business. But one other thing that I wanted to flag is that our office measures its success based on regulatory cost savings. And so each year we publish a report to Congress that outlines our impact. And on average, we average anywhere between $900 million and over $1 billion in cost savings to small businesses as a result of our advocacy and also encouraging small businesses to comment on rulemakings. Next slide. So there are also 3 agencies that have to convene a small business panel before we're proposing a rule expected to have a significant impact on small business. Those are EPA, OSHA, and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And so the way that you can get involved with those is by sitting on one of those review panels, offering your comments at that stage. Next slide. There's also several other executive orders. 13272 requires agencies to notify us of upcoming rules. It requires us to train the agencies. And again, as I mentioned, it requires us to produce an annual report outlining the cost savings that we've had. Next slide. So here's just a little bit more about our fiscal year 2020 report. And we also just released our 2021 report last month. And so as you can see, we saved $2.2 billion in cost savings last year. Next slide. So again, these are just some ways that you can get involved. You can contact our office with any of your regulatory concerns, subscribe to our listservs, and attend our forums and roundtables. And then on the last slide here, you'll find my contact information. If you go to the next slide, you'll find my contact information and also the ways to get in touch with us. So I know that was a very quick, very high-level overview, but I hope folks found this useful and that you'll consider getting involved in rulemaking. Myself and all of my colleagues are willing to schedule phone calls if you have particular rules that are burdensome to you, or if there are any other issues that you would like to present to us. Also, all of our phone numbers and emails are listed on our website. They are our direct lines, so please do get in touch with us. Again, I want to thank you so much for having me today, and I hope everyone has a great weekend.
Thank you so much, Priyanka. Once again, I just want to say, please join us at the Kennedy Center for a night of networking with over 200 federal contractors. Our quarterly event will take place on Monday, June 20th. Sponsorship opportunities are available. Federal agencies will be present and listed as they confirm. Please note that ticket prices increase on June 13th. Thank you again to our great speakers and panelists, Archisha and Priyanka, our sponsors, and everyone who attended the presentation today. The recording and slides will be available by close of business Monday. We look forward to seeing you next week as we dig into the Department of Interior. The FAR supplement will be on Wednesday and the Playbook on Friday. The registration links are on our website. Thank you so much, everyone.